Well, thank you very much, Andrea, and actually thank you to everybody who's come. It's wonderful to see so many friends. I don't think I've been so kissed for a very long time. And I also want to thank everybody at UUP, because especially Chloe, who's put the party together. But above all, Sue Blackwell. Sue is the artist who makes these wonderful cutouts of books that she finds in antiquarian bookshops, and she turns them into these mysterious landscapes, many of them influenced and inspired by fairy tales. And I also am delighted that finally Carolina and Riccardo and Sofia, I hope I can't see Sofia, are here. The book is dedicated to them, my grandchildren and my daughter-in-law. And of course to Conrad, the inspiration of my life. Anyway, the title, A Short History of Fairy Tale, has excited some comment, because people have said, why is it not a short history of fairy tales? And the reason that I want to explain just very briefly, I'm only going to talk for a short time, is that on the one hand there are individual fairy tales, or individual wonder tales, if you want. And some are very well known, like The Little Mermaid, or Donkey Skin, or Cinderella. And they're familiar words, made of words and images. And on the other hand, there are unfamiliar stories, but they're also discrete stories. And this is a favorite of mine, which is when the three princesses are not turned into beasts, but are turned into oranges. And they have to be turned back into women by the love of the prince. And it's inspired the Prokofiev opera. But then on the other hand, apart from these discrete stories, which are recognizable fairy tales, familiar or unfamiliar, and have a relationship to a dream, there are the invented stories, which we don't think of so much as fairy tales. There's Lewis Carroll. Lewis Carroll always called Alice in Wonderland a fairy tale. He has a poem in the book in which he says that he's writing a fairy tale. And there he's picking up on the idea that you enter an underworld. So I became interested in what would be the generic characteristics of fairy tale, rather than the specific stories that are called fairy tales. Why did Lewis Carroll think of his story as a fairy tale when it clearly wasn't Cinderella? So I've tried in the little book to define some of these qualities that make the fairy tale world. And the first element, I thought, which people found a bit unfamiliar, the readers, when they first read it, so they thought it was a funny place to start, is that I think it always presumes that there is a parallel world that it isn't available to the eyes or sight, but we know it to exist, or the shared world of reader or listener and creator of the story knows this world to exist. And that flows under, for example, Shakespeare's plays, Oberon, Titania and Puck with fairies dancing, William Blake. This is the secondary world that C.S. Lewis talked about. It's totally present in the Arabian Nights with the world of the jinn. Marvellous illustration by Kai Nielsen of a jinni carrying off the Princess Badura. And then a second intrinsic element is that we believe the stories to be traditional. We believe them, they may not be. In fact, there's obviously some point of origin, but also sometimes they are invented and fantastical in the minds of certain writers. But we believe them to have this connection across time, often across languages, across cultures. And this transmission is frequently imagined to be, projected to be, in the female voice. And I have been interested in that for a long time in my writing life. The first person to use the phrase conte de fées in French was a woman, Marie-Catherine Daunois, a little bit earlier than Perrault, who's the most famous, who projected himself into the persona of Mother Goose. And that translated almost immediately from French into English and became this generic figure of the old crone storyteller. And the old crone storyteller has pervaded consciousness and created her own avatars. And one of my favorites is Helen Adam. I don't know how many of you know Helen Adam, but I put her in because several people have mentioned how much they liked the quotation from her in the book. And you can find her on YouTube. She's a bit like Stevie Smith. She sort of chants and closes her eyes and goes off into a dream world. And she was born Scottish, and she remembers the ballads of her childhood, but she turns them into much more macabre and dark. And for example, this one goes, "Is it dark down there, Prince Horrendous? Dark down there with Betsy's skull? Is it dark down there where the grass grows through the hair? Is it dark in the underland of Null?" Now, all her language, her grammar, is a fairy tale grammar, but none of the stories, most of the poems, don't tell recognizable stories, but they are recognizably in the fairy tale genre. And then we have the anti-tale, the idea of someone entering this territory, the territory of fairy tale, the territory of the shared language of symbols, and opposing them, turning them upside down. And Angela Carter is the dominant voice in that. I've had many years of teaching Angela Carter, and my admiration for her has not been diminished, but it was a struggle, since I had to read hundreds of essays in which undergraduates were enraptured over her very disturbing dreams of the fairy tale world. And then Paula Rego, who's someone I admire hugely and is a great inspiration to me, actually captures very well this idea of the shared world of the fairy tale, where secrets and stories are exchanged as almost samizdat between different characters in the playground or in the nursery. Another element that I'm getting very close to the end now, don't worry. Another element that I was I'm very committed to is that while this shared language is a symbolic language that's not anchored necessarily in empirical experience, the stories do attach themselves to real phenomena and real emotions, that they are revelatory in some ways of the conditions in which people struggle to survive. And that gives them their depth. And there's a quotation that I really like that came from a German scholar of fairy tales who I hadn't heard of, André Jolès. And the miraculous is here the only guarantee that the immorality of reality has stopped. In some sense, the true burden of fairy tales is the immorality of reality. So stories like Hansel and Gretel really do place infanticide at the heart of their plot. Stories like Beauty and the Beast really place arranged marriage at the heart of their plot. And stories like Snow White place the terrifying experiences of stepmothers, stepchildren, and the difficulties in the fairy tale world with that. And there has been very interesting discussion I mean, there have been many discussions of the plots of fairy tales, but Bianca Nieves, for example, takes up this idea of the Disney wicked stepmother and puts a spin on it that's truly enthralling with this very, very beautiful performance by Maribel Verdú. And then just recently, I was actually moved to tears. I don't know how many of you saw it, by the surprise twist in Maleficent. I'm surprised to find myself praising a Disney product, but actually Angelina Jolie, I think, had an input, and as she's adopted many children and finds herself in the position of the stepmother, foster mother figure in the plot, she's actually introduced a superb twist, which I recommend to you all, in her Gothic majesty, but with a tender heart. So that's it.